Hello and welcome to the Relocation 101 Module 5. My name is Paula Hyman from the Ohio LTAP Center, and I'm going to be your technical support for today's webinar. Just a couple of items. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the questions pod, and our presenter will address your questions periodically throughout the presentation. Secondly, there are items available to download in the handout section. If for some reason you are unable to download the handouts, put your email in the questions pod and I will email it to you directly. I want to thank you in advance for your participation with that. And I'm going to pass things back to Patty Moorman, Relocation Unit Manager with ODOT Central Real Estate, Central Office Real Estate. Patty?
Well, good morning, and it's glad to have you guys all back for Relocation 101. We are going to be completing Module 5 today. And in Module 5, our agenda is going to include the replacement housing payments for the 90-day tenants and occupants of less than 90 days, the information that you need before you compute a rental assistance payment and work on the calculations. And then we're also going to talk about the down payment assistance for the 90-day occupants. Now, I think you all know who I am, but I am including my name information, contact information, just in case you do have any follow-up questions. If you don't want to put them in the question box, feel free to email me or give me a call. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. We finished up on our module on the replacement housing payments for owners, and now we're going to talk about the 90-day tenant occupants. Now, to be eligible under this section, tenants need to be in residence longer than 90 days prior to the initiation of negotiations. So let's talk about what our learning outcomes are going to be for this module. So at the end of this module, you will understand the purpose of a rent supplement payment. You'll know how to compute a rental assistance payment for 90-day tenant occupants. You'll be able to explain the difference between the fair market value or the economic rent and the actual contract rent. You will know who is eligible for a down payment assistance, and you'll know how it is calculated. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I expect this module probably will only take about 30 minutes. I don't think it's, I think we'll probably run through these pretty quick. Some of it may seem like it's a refresher because we've talked about some of this stuff in some of the previous modules. But if something comes up, you have a question, please put it in the question box. Also, please keep in mind, Relocation 101 is just an overview. So, the details, we will go into much more detail on how to put these payments together in the advanced residential class. But I think what we have here will give you a good understanding of how all the information that you're going to need in order to come up with your calculations. So the goal with this payment is to bridge any financial gap that may exist between what your displacees are currently paying in rent and utilities and what they're going to need to pay on the open market for rent and utilities on a comparable housing unit. So in order to calculate the rental assistance payment, you first have to gather a lot of information, and you're gathering the information on their current situation, where they're at now, what is their household situation, and we're going to go over the information that you need to be asking for. And as you remember from Module 2, the earliest opportunity that you're going to have to gather all this information is going to be at the pre-ac interview. And that's going to be when you first meet these potential displacees. So at this meeting, you need to gather specific biographical, and financial information in order to locate the appropriate housing and then to calculate their maximum benefits. Now, later on, once they choose a replacement site, you'll gather information on that site. For right now, all you're concerned with is where are they at now, what do they pay, and what is their situations. So at ODOT, we use the form RE600 during the pre-act to record the pertinent information. Now, ODOT has created this RE600 form, which serves as the interview form for you to collect all this data during your interview. You have a copy of this form from the previous modules, so I did not include it in the handouts again. And we'll review this form in much more detail when we're in the advanced residential class, which is Relocation 201. So what information do you need to be gathering during this interview? And some of this we have touched on and we've talked about. Go over it again. So you need to know how long have they lived at the location, as that's going to dictate their eligibility for benefits. Remember, they need to have been there at least 90 days prior to the initiation of negotiations. So especially for tenants, you need to know their household income. Now, it may seem a little uncomfortable to ask somebody about their income the first time that you meet them, but you need to tell them that they're not required to share this information with you, but if they do, it only stands to potentially benefit them, as they may be entitled to more benefits depending on their income level. And in a couple more slides, we're going to put a potential rent supplement payment side by side, and you'll see how much of a difference it can really make. Right. Still there are some that they will not give you that information, even though, you show them that it possibly could really make a difference in their rent supplement payment. Now, in order to substantiate their income, we ask tenants to provide either their current pay stubs and that you make sure that they are consecutive, so that we can calculate their average monthly income. Now, you need to know their family makeup and how many adults and children and their ages may be living in the home. And as you remember from a previous module, there's a couple reasons why you need to do that. One, you need to know, is this one household, one family, even though it may be, it may include grandma and grandpa or others. Are they one household? You need to know that. You also need to know if they have an adequate number of bedrooms for the kids. So putting down the information on the children, especially their ages, it's very important to gather at this interview. Now, you must know what they are currently paying in rent. We need a copy of the lease for our records, but tenants rarely seem to have one, so typically you're going to have to obtain that from the landlord. Now, you're going to ask about schools, although you will try to find comps in their school district. That is not a requirement for your prime comp. Also, a big thing with tenants is their pets. Again, you'll try to find comps that maybe accept pets, but it is not a requirement that you do. So you will ask them what utilities they pay at their current place. And you'll be making note of which ones that they have, because you're going to need this information. Is there stove gas or is it electric? What about their heating? You do not need to ask for the utility bills because you're going to use a utility sheet, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you do need to make sure you don't forget, ask what the appliances run on. And when you go look at comps, make sure you look to see what the stove if it's a gas hookup or if it's an electric hookup. I can't tell you how many times I had to call the landlord or go back and look again because I forgot to do that. So a copy of the utility allowance worksheet was provided to you as a handout. That's what you use for the utilities instead of the actual utility bills. Now, you as an agent will also gather the local income criteria, which can be found on the HUD website. HUD's data is collected and it's reported for all the counties and the metropolitan areas in Ohio. And a copy of the HUD income limit table was provided to you in the handout. So you need to ask about government subsidies, and the displacee will need to provide documentation of them to support their income. Now, additionally, the displacee may be participating in a housing program such as, HUD Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly known as Section 8. If they are, you need to get a copy of the voucher information. Now, one thing to keep in mind when gathering information is that food stamps do not get counted as gross income in the gross income calculations. And you'll need to know the market rental rates in the area, as your displacee may be paying below market or no rent. So you're gonna check the market. You're gonna see what the average rents are. So if the average rent is $800 and they're only paying $400, then they're not paying market rent. Okay, we are ready for our first knowledge check. Okay, so the first question: to be eligible for a rent supplement payment or a down payment, an occupant must occupy the acquired site for, is it 180 days prior to the initiation of negotiations? Is it 90 days prior to the initiation of negotiations, 90 days prior to the pre-acquisition survey, or 90 days prior to the appraisal? Excellent. Very good. It is 90 days prior to the initiation of negotiations. So question number 2. So the relocation form that is completed when the information is gathered at the first interview is it the RE600, the RE612, the RE616, or the RE617? That's correct. That is the interview form that ODOT has created that you will use when you do your interview. Okay, question number 3. Information needed to compute a housing payment includes all of the below except: is it household income? Is it current school system? Is it current monthly rental amount? Or is it length of occupancy? Excellent. It is the school system. While especially if they have kids in high school, you really want to look, because they're not going to be happy with you if your comps are outside of the school district. But it is not a requirement. And remember, the same for pets. Okay, question number 4. Information not needed to compute a maximum RSP payment includes low income criteria from HUD, rental of the replacement site, government assistance vouchers, or the current utility allowance worksheet? Which do you not need to calculate your payment? Okay, you do need the low income criteria, because you need to determine um, if they are eligible for 30%. You do not need the information on the rental replacement site, because that's for later. Remember, they haven't chose a replacement site yet. That comes later on. You need the government assistance vouchers, because you need to know that information and looking for comps. And you of course need the utility allowance worksheet. So the correct answer was you do not need the rental information for the replacement site. Okay, so let's go on to what do you do after you gather all this information? So then you're gonna start your form of all your 15 comparability factors, and you're going to go out in the market and you're going to find the comparable rental properties to compute the displacee's rental assistance entitlement or offer. So you use the same items of the comparability that we discussed in the last module. You still have those 15 items there and you're still looking for them. Now, there are some that are more important to owners than tenants, but those are the criteria you are looking for. So much of the same sources for the comps are also applicable to the rentals. The ones we talked about for the newspapers, sometimes the realtors also have rentals, so definitely talk to the realtors for rentals. Drive-bys, you're going to do a lot of drive-bys, you're going to look in the newspapers. The form that you will use is ODOT's for the tenants is the ODOT RE611-T. It's different from the owner form. So make sure you're using the right form. And keep in mind that the maximum for a rent supplement payment before you need to request last resort housing is $7,200. So once the comparables are located, then you need to verify their contract rent. And you need to find out what utilities the tenant would need to pay at each location. You need to know what type of appliances in each rental has, electric or gas. You're going to calculate each comp's base rent. So the base rent is determined by adding together the contract rent and the monthly utilities. And you're going to need to know if that contract rent includes any of the utilities. So the average monthly utilities can be found for most metropolitan areas and counties from the HUD or the local public housing authority. Now they list the average monthly utility costs for heating, electric, water, and sewer. So you have a handout from today of a utility worksheet from the Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority. And what you do is you match up the utility rate you look at the type of home, you look at the type of usage. Is it gas? Is it electric? Is it water? And then you're going to look at the number of bedrooms in the house. And that's going to give you the utility rate that you are going to use in your calculations. So you calculate the base rent for your displacement site. Now the base rent of your displacement site is going to be one of three things. So you're either going to have your monthly contract or your market rent plus the utilities. It's either going to be the amount on their lease, or if you had to do market rent, okay, because they were paying below market. Okay, so it's either contract rent or market rent plus utilities. Or it could be 30% of the displacee's gross household income if they fall under low income. Or if they are in government assisted housing, the total of all housing assistance subsidies that they received. So you're either looking at what are they actually paying, or their market rent, okay? Or it's going to be their 30% if they're low income, or the government housing subsidies. That's why it's important for that voucher. Okay, you need those three things so you know what you're using to calculate their RSP. Okay, so let's talk about the low income. With tenants, you have to understand that their economic situation, and remember that we discussed about obtaining the displacee's gross household income during the pre-act. You need that to calculate their RSP offer, okay, if they have provided the documentation for their income and their income level is below the HUD low income threshold, then we use what is known as 30% of income calculation. And it is really in their best interest to give you this information if it appears that they would fall into that category. So low income is determined using the HUD income limits. It is based on gross earnings, the number of bedrooms specific to a geographical area. But keep in mind, there may be situations where their current base rent is less than 30% already, and the calculation would not benefit them. But most of the time, if they are low income, it really does benefit them. And again, we'll have a slide here later on that will show you how much it could benefit them. So once you have calculated the base rent, remember the base rent is the contract or market rent plus the utilities, okay? Or it could be that 30%, or it could be the HUD subsidies, okay? So once you have calculated that base rent at the displacement site, and you have your prime comparable, any difference in the is the calculated monthly differential or the rent supplement payment. So the monthly differential is then calculated or multiplied by 42 months to determine the maximum rental assistance payment or offer. So at ODOT, you would make your relocation offer to a tenant within 7 days of the acquisition offer. And you would use the form RET is the offer letter. The tenant has a different offer letter than the owner. Remember, you have to make the offer within 7 days. So on this slide, we have a simple example of how this works. So your prime comp that you go out and find in the market, including utilities based on the utility worksheet, is $1,000. So the base monthly rental of the displacement site, including utilities from your worksheet, is $900. So the monthly rental, the rent differential is $100. You're going to times that by 42 months. So in this situation, their rent supplement payment calculates out the maximum you have set is $4,200. Now, after you've made your offer and the displacee finds a replacement site, then you must calculate their actual rental supplement payment, commonly referred to again as the rental assistance payment. So you'll need to visit the replacement site You need to perform that decent, safe, and sanitary inspection that we talked about in a previous module. As we cannot give them money and participate in them occupying, even as tenants, something that is not DS&S. So once you complete your DS&S inspection and you complete the RE 616, the 616, that is the DS&S form. We also reviewed that in a previous module. You will need to know that the contract rent and what utilities the tenant will be responsible for to calculate their RSP payment. And remember, you're going to use your utility worksheet to come up with the utilities, but you got to know what they are. Okay, so you go to the replacement site again, look and see what are the hookups there for gas. Is it a gas stove? Is it an electric stove? So that you can come up with your utilities. So then the final rental payment is the lesser of. It's either the difference between the prime comp's monthly rent and utilities and the displacement site's base rent times 42 months. The difference between the monthly cost of rent and utilities at the replacement site and the base rent of the displacement dwelling multiplied by 42 months. Okay, remember your payment cannot exceed the amount of the original relocation offer. Okay, so let's do a case study. And since we can't get together in a room and you can't work in groups, I'm just going to read this case study, and then we're going to kind of go over how you would calculate the offer based on different situations. So Mr. and Mrs. Hillman, along with their son and daughter, they rent and occupy a single family dwelling containing 1,900 square feet that is being acquired for a highway project. Okay, the dwelling has 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room, and 2 bathrooms. The Hillman family has rented the property for 3 years. Okay, so that tells you they have adequate bedrooms and that they meet the criteria. So the current rent is $1,100 per month plus total utilities averages about $150 a month. So they have and that's based on a utility worksheet. So the base rent is $1,250. The total gross household income for the Hillmans is $4,200 a month. Okay, you times that by 12 months, so they have an annual income of $49,200. So you as a relocation agent, you've located 3 good comparable rentals, and you've selected your prime comp, which is currently available for $1,375 per month, including utilities. Now they live in Toledo, and so you have found the income criteria from HUD's website for their area. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look to see are they low income. So you're going to look at how many bedrooms they have, how many people occupy the house, what county are they in. Okay, and you're going to find that at 49, what was it, 49,200, they're good. They are not low income. So their prime comp written utilities is $1,375 less the displacement written utilities $1,250. The difference is $125. You're going to times that by 42 months, and their maximum rental assistance payment is $5,250. Okay, so now let's look at what happens if maybe they become low income. So let's assume that the Hillman's average monthly gross household income is now only $3,500 a month. So what effect does this have on the rental assistance payment? So your prime comp is still $1,375. Your current rent and utilities is still $1,250. However, if you do their 30% income on their $3,500 a month, that only comes to $1,050. That means they're currently paying more than 30% of their income. So what you're going to do is, instead of using the $1,250, you're using the $1,050. Comparing that, you're going to subtract $1,050 from the $1,375. So now you have $325, and instead of the amount you had before. So and you're going to times it by 42 months. Now the rental assistance payment is $13,650. Again, because of the low income. So let's look at these side by side. And, when you're talking with a tenant and they're saying, well, I don't want to give you my income, look at the difference that it makes. $5,250 versus $13,650. But, it's their option. I mean, sometimes even when you explain this, they still won't give you the information. So let's look at the final RSP. So we're still assuming that they are low income. The replacement site, dwellings, rent, and utilities, is $1,350. We're still using their 30% income of $1,050. Difference is $300 times 42 months is $12,600. Now you notice that amount is lower than the maximum that you calculated. But remember, when it comes to relocation, they needed to spend it to get all of it. So what they will actually be able to receive is just the $12,600. Okay, so now let's talk about fair market rent and actual rent. So if you remember, when we were discussing the information you collect at the start of the RSP determination process, you need to know what the rental values are in the area. You need to know this because your displacee may be paying below market, or they may be paying no rent. This situation, it comes up when a tenant, they may be related to or maybe a friend of the landlord, and they may not be paying market rent. I had one where mom was living in the house, son owned it, and he wasn't charging her any rent. Or, I've also had where, you've got someone only paying $200 a month when market rent is, for that area is $600 a month. It may also come up where the landlord, he reduces the monthly rent because the tenant performs some sort of service, such as lawn care, snow removal. Maybe he helps, collect rents if it's in an apartment complex. In these instances, the agent needs to determine the market or economic rent for the displacement site. Now, market rent or economic rent, they're going to be discussed in more detail in Relocation Tour 1. But the important thing for you just to remember at this right now is they're really the same thing. Whether you call it fair market rent or whether you call it economic rent, they're one in the same. So the market rent or economic rent, it's what the property would rent for on the open market with no reductions. So market rent will be used in a rent supplement computation in lieu of the contract rent unless it would cause a hardship because of the displacee's income or other circumstances. So I have included a copy um, of an instructional guide or worksheet for a market rent study. This was actually a form that one of the right-of-way consultants came up with, and we have, we we thought it was really good. It's a really good tool if you are determining an economic rent or a market rent. So we are sharing it when we do these classes. So you have this as a handout. So if down the road you need to do a market rent or an economic rent, you can use this form as a tool. And it's kind of self-explanatory. You just kind of you use it as a worksheet when you're out there gathering information on. And when you're doing this, you're looking at places that are rented, because you're looking to establish what is the rental market out there now. So you're not looking for ones for rent. You're looking for what is rented out there. So before we go on, is there any questions about what we've talked about so far? How you calculate 30% or the rent supplement payment or anything on the market rent, economic rent? Okay, I don't see any questions in the question box, so we'll go. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the down payment assistance. So down payment assistance is a fantastic opportunity for a displaced tenant. Now that these tenants, they may elect to apply the entire amount of their rental assistance benefit towards the down payment and incidental closing costs associated with the purchase of a home. If your computed rental assistance entitlement is less than $7,200, which again is the maximum amount until it goes into last resort. In Ohio, we increase the payment up to $7,200 for the purpose of a down payment. So if you remember in the example we had, the rent supplement payment before going into 30% wasn't it like 42 some it was okay, it was 5250. Okay, so in Ohio, if they wanted to, instead of continuing as tenants, if they wanted to purchase something, we would bump that up to 7,200 to help them with a down payment on a home. Now, not every tenant is going to have the financial, ability to purchase a home, but for those that do, this is a great opportunity to get assistance to make the purchase. A lot of that is going to depend on their credit and if they're even able to, um, get a mortgage to purchase. But if they can, it is a great opportunity. I've worked with many, well it's a single mom, and they have the opportunity now to get out and get into a home, get their children into a nice home, and it's a great thing to be able to do. And you as an agent, you need to make sure that you do explain this option to to the displaced person. I mean, they may say, oh no, I don't want to buy, I only want to rent. That's fine, but make sure they know that that opportunity is out there, especially that the down payment would bump up to 7,200 if they choose to purchase a home. Okay, we are ready for our second knowledge check. So the first question, at ODOT, the offer to a tenant is made, is it within 15 days, 7 days, 10 days, or 3 days of the initiation of negotiations? Seven days. That's right. Yeah, they have to, it has to be made within 7 days. You can make it before, but it has to be 7 days unless you have a really, really good reason for going over that date. The second question is the maximum amount of the DPIL, which is the down payment, before it becomes last resort housing is. Excellent. You guys all got it right. That's right. 7,200. After it goes over 7,200, whether it's a rent supplement payment or a down payment, is in last resort housing. So, question number 3. A tenant is providing landscaping services to offset his non-typical rent. The RSP calculation will be based on which? Will be based on economic rent, actual rent receipts, market rent, or both A and C. This one's kind of tricky. It's both A and C because remember, economic rent and market rent are the same thing. It's just, you know, two different titles for the economic rent and the market rent. Remember, if he's providing landscaping services, he's not paying market rent. They've probably, they've knocked off part of his rent, so he's not paying market rent. So you have to establish what's the value of that landscaping service that he's providing. What is the market rent that he should be paying? He could be only paying 400 and he should be paying 600 because that's the market rent. So then the market rent is what you're going to use to calculate his rent supplement payment. Okay, and we are at the end of this module already. So I'm going to go over the learning outcomes, and then it'll be time for you to take the quiz when you're ready. So let's review what we've talked about. So what is the purpose of a rent supplement payment? So if you recall, the purpose is to fill the gap of any financial issues they may have between the rent and the utilities they currently pay and what they're going to need to pay in the replacement site. So how do you compute a rental assistance payment for 90-day tenants? Well, the rental assistance payment is made to ensure that the comparable dwelling for the replacement for the displacee to rent and that they have the funds necessary to rent, including the applicable utility costs. To determine the rental assistance offer, you calculate the base rent. Remember, the base rent is contract rent utilities, could be market rent utilities, could be 30% of their income, or it could be all the HUD subsidies. Okay. To determine the rental assistance offer, So you're going to then subtract that base rent of the subject from the base rent of the prime comparable, and then you're going to multiply it by 42 months. Now this gives you the displacee's rental assistance entitlement offer. Their actual payment cannot exceed this amount, meaning when they choose a replacement site, this sets the maximum that they're going to receive. If you remember in that example, you calculated out $13,650, but what they actually rented, they only needed $12,650 or whatever it was. So they only get what they spend. So where do you get your utility data? You get it from, remember the utility worksheet? You're going to get it from that utility worksheet from HUD. Okay, at ODOT, you will use the RE611T for the tenant computations. And what is the base rent for a displacement site? Again, one of these three things: contract rent or market rent plus utilities, 30% of the displacee's household income. Remember the 30% worksheet that you're going to get from HUD, or the total of all housing assistance subsidies received. So the displacee's final RSP payment is the lesser of. It's either the amount that we just went over how to calculate, or the difference, which is the difference between the base rent at the displacement site and the base rent at the replacement site, multiplied by 42 months. So the fair market or the economic rent is what the displacement dwelling would rent for on the open market versus what a person may actually be paying because of some special arrangement. In these cases, you use market rent in place of the contract rent. Such as the guy with the landscaping, his contract may say he's only paying $400 when market rent is $600 because he's doing landscape work. Any person eligible to receive a rental assistance payment is eligible for a down payment assistance of a minimum of $7,200. Remember, that means if you determine a rent supplement payment of $5,250, but they decide to purchase, you bump it up to $7,200. And that $7,200 would include down payment, and they can also use it for closing costs as well. Okay, are there any questions? Any questions before you can move on to your quiz, or and until we conclude this module for today? Okay, well, I do not see any questions. Module 6 is on Thursday. So seeing no more questions, thank you all for attending today, and I will see or talk to you all on Thursday.